Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and welcome to a man coming in from Maryland, USA. And what I must say is a very colourful background. And I think if you work in an office as colourful as this, with an $800 heavy timber ensemble in the wall, it's a very, very pleasant environment to work in. So welcome to the podcast, Mickie Kennedy.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Mickie, we were just talking before we pressed record, and you're talking about the background of your fireplace and how it used to be black. And a feng shui consultant said, "Hey, maybe you need to paint it blue so it pops out and move to the side." And which they were giving maybe you a little bit of PR, a bit of advice.
Yeah, I love advice. You don't always have to listen to it, but it made a lot of sense when I heard it.
Awesome. So, hey, this conversation is going to be really interesting. You're the founder of eReleases. You've got a distinguished background in PR and particularly working with small businesses on helping to get their message out, and not necessarily having to rely on the big media releases that say a lot of the big organizations do, and how to do it without a massive budget. So really looking forward to this. You've been doing this for a long time. I also noticed you've got a degree in English with a component of anthropology?
Yeah, so my undergrad is English Lit and anthropology. My graduate degree is a Master's of Fine Arts in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry. So,
Wow. So no wonder you're in PR, my friend.
yeah, makes sense. Maybe. I don't know.
You are a linguistics genius, is what they're saying.
I'm something. I'm not sure, but I thought I was unemployable, but to be honest, but it's worked out okay.
It's worked out okay. All right. So before we jump into the nuances of PR and hopefully give us some advice, and we'll talk about a number of different topics, always like to delve into the background of guests. And you've just shared you've got a English Lit, anthropology, English literature, specializing in poetry, which is fantastic. So looking for no pressure, my friend. I'm expecting some off the cuff linguistic genius work today. uh, you're also in sales or helping with sales as part of your career as well, and had quite a bit of success there. Love to know a little bit more about your background for the benefit of the listeners, and specifically what has led you to do what you do today with eReleases.
Sure. So, I guess about 30 years ago, I'd finished my MFA in creative writing, and really my goal was to wait tables and write poetry and live this little bohemian life. And I had always waited tables part time, and then after graduating, I did it full time. Which
Yeah.
anybody who knows, working full time, waiting tables is not 40 hours a week, it's like 60 because they expect you to work these 10, 12-hour shifts, and you spend 2 or 3 hours wrapping silverware and napkins and doing busy work for like it's not even minimum wage in the US. It's like $2 or something. And but like, hey, but for 8 hours you got to make tips. So,
Yeah.
we hope it worked out well, but not always. And I realized after doing this full time for a summer, I can't, this is not sustainable. It is really rough on your legs and back,
Mm.
being on concrete for 10, 12 hours. And it's just, my mind was so zapped at the end of the day. I wasn't reading or writing. And so I went and found a safe office job at a telecom research startup in Washington, D.C. And there I was in charge of sales. But because I had a writing background, they also said, "Hey, write some press releases and send them out occasionally. We have this brand new $5,000 fax machine, and you can send it to 100 numbers." And I was like, "Whoa!" And they're like, "How many numbers do we have?" And the owner's like, 150. And I was like, "Well, how does that work?" He goes, "Well, you put the 100 numbers in, you hit send." Then you delete the 100 numbers and you put the 50 in. And I was like, oh my God, can we get a second fax machine and put 50 in that one and 100 in that? So I'm not programming and deleting numbers. Literally, I spent 3 hours programming and deleting numbers, programming and deleting numbers, and the rest of the day just hitting send,
Mm.
and collecting the error reports at the end of the day because there'd always be a dozen that never went through.
Yeah.
And so uh, I did that and nothing happened. And the owner of the company goes, "Yeah, we've never had any media pickup, but everyone says you have to do it. So just keep doing it." And I'm like, I literally am wasting a day and a half doing this every month. And I just felt like that's not a good answer that,
Mm.
yeah, nothing happens. So I looked at articles and I realized that for me, the big aha moment is that most articles, even if they're small, they follow a story arc,
Hmm.
and we were publishing raw data.
Right.
And, we'd always been trained that, hey, for good PR, put some numbers in it. Well, people usually have a story that they're putting numbers in. We were just putting the numbers out. We literally would say, hey, here's Caribbean telecom traffic data to and from the United States. Brand new numbers. Here you go. No context. And so
Yes.
I took those numbers and was looking over them, and I noticed that one country stood out. I couldn't even tell you right now, but you've never heard of it. I've never heard of it. It's not a country that registers on anyone's radar, but they had more inbound and outbound traffic to and from the United States than basically every other Caribbean country combined. And so I asked my boss about it. And he goes, "Oh, that's the call center for 1-900 numbers, which was really
Ah.
popular back, I guess, in the 1990s. You could call a 1-900 number, and what you didn't realize it was the 1-900 was being routed to a different country,
Yeah.
and and the price you paid varied. So if you could call a recorded line and they'd say, you want your horoscope? If you're a Capricorn, press one, or if you're a Leo, press two. And you would get a recorded line that changed every day. And, for 75 cents a minute, you get your horoscope, and they'd probably try to keep you on there 3 or 4 minutes. So that'd cost you, $3. And you could also call and speak to someone live, like a live psychic or a pet expert, and that might be $3 or $6 a minute. And it
Mm.
would just be billed to your landline, which was, this was pre-cell phone, so there were no cell
Yes.
phones. Uh, and so I wrote the story about, hey, what's this country and why is almost all this data going to and from there? And oh, it turns out it's 1-900 numbers, and just talking about it and talking about the different types of 1-900 numbers there are. And I sent that press release. We got picked up by The Economist, the Financial Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Red Herring, and three telecom trade publications. And our phones rang, the cells poured through, and I felt so smart. And then I was just like, I wonder if I could do this again. And I never did that well, but I did very well. Like every once in a while, nothing would happen, or you get one or two articles. But then, we'd come across a gem, and we get 3 or 4 articles. But that first one was like right out of the bat. And I just felt so empowered that I was like, why aren't other small businesses figuring this out? And I was also getting phone calls after I would fax, and they'd say, "Hey, this is so and so at this news outlet. Instead of faxing, could you start emailing it to us?" And I
Mm.
was like, "Oh yeah." And they're all of them are at AOL, because there was no
That was it.
Gmail, there was no Yahoo email address at the time. Everything was paid, and it was either AT&T or AOL. And there wasn't even a at New York Times yet. I don't even think they had websites yet in the early
Wow.
90s. And so I started building a Rolodex of journalists, and then the light bulb went off and said, it's so much easier to email like a group of journalists than to fax. I could do this for other clients. And so
Mm.
when I started, that was e-releases. The E was email. And I spent about a year after that just collecting email addresses of journalists, networking with them and bulletin boards, which is another thing that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yep.
And they were just free and sharing, and everybody was excited. Journalists would ask me, "You're going to send me press releases? Do I have to pay for this?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Wow." And now journalists are like, "Don't send me anything. I get too much as it is." But it was an exciting time. And then over the years, PR Newswire here in the United States is a large newswire or press release has reached out to me and said, "We like what you're doing. We like that you work with really small companies and startups and stuff like that. Just to let you know, our salespeople would never reach out to these people. Every salesperson targets a company that they think they can get at least $20,000 to $30,000 a year from them." And I'm
Yep.
like, well, yeah, you're not going to get that from my customers. And they said, "No, but aggregately, you represent a lot of these customers. If you handle the customer service and you handle everything, we could give you access to the wire." And at first, they just wanted to give me like local distribution, but I hung on and I said, my clients deserve and want national distribution. And so every release that goes out through us goes out nationally through PR Newswire, and they charge their customers today over $1,700 for a 600 word press release to go out nationally in the US.
Wow.
And our clients pay me about 25% of that. So it's like a 75% savings. And so it's a big, discount. The caveat is if you're publicly traded or a big client, we're going to send you away and we're going to introduce you to a salesperson at PR Newswire because we want to be a good partner with them. But it's really been a great relationship. And today we do over 10,000 press releases a year for small businesses and startups and authors and entrepreneurs. And so it's really great. And it's given us a really great access to them because unfortunately, how I started with emailing journalists is now one of the worst ways to reach journalists because media databases have come out. And so,
Yes.
if you're a golf club company and you just spent $10,000 for a 1 year license to a media database and you blasted all 2,400 golf club companies or journalists who write about golf clubs, and your boss is now saying, "Well, we just we just did that and we got nothing. We got mentioned in a little blog." And they're like,
Mm.
"Yeah." And he's like, "Well, you know who likes to play golf? Who's that? Bankers and financial people, Wall Street bros." And they're like, "Okay, well, let's start sending this to financial analysts and banking analysts and people who will never write about golf clubs." So that happens in every industry. So the biggest complaint I hear from journalists now is we are getting so much spam. It's like I cover sports and I'm getting
Mm.
press releases about energy drinks and
Yes.
snacks and things that I will never write about, and that's made it very bad for reaching through email. And for that reason, most journalists in the US go to the Newswire. And in the US, it's PR Newswire and Business Wire. They basically enjoy a duopoly of the press release newswires. There's other wires people have heard of, like AP and Reuters and Dow Jones, and they have a different business model. They
Yeah.
never run press releases. They run articles that they've written, and they license those articles to papers. So if you're,
Yeah.
the Baltimore Sun and the Supreme Court just made a big decision and it's 5 o'clock and the editor just wants to go home and have dinner with his kids and family, he can just say, "Hey, we'll just pull that story off the AP. It's a small licensing fee. We don't have to worry about writing it over the next 3 or 4 hours, and we're done." So, that's kind of how that works. But it's been really great. I mean, I've had a single press release result in a couple hundred articles. That's the real magic where if you have something that's very newsworthy, it can go very far on the wire because a lot of people have access to it and it can do really well. And so that's it's magical when things like that happen. But the thing is, it doesn't have to happen at that scale. It can
Yeah.
happen where you just get 2 or 3 pickups, and that's a huge win, and it results in a lot of sales. And when you get that credibility of a journalist choosing to write about you, and people read it, they get energized. There's this human interest element. It's like credibility and a signal of trust. and people want to do business with you. It's not like an ad where
Mm.
most people see ads, they're like, I don't want to work with this person, or 5% of the people who see an ad might want to work with you. But when people see articles, they get energized, they want to work with you. They don't open a new window and say, can I find this product or something similar cheaper elsewhere?
Mm.
They are invested in you, and that's the real magic of that type of almost implied endorsement when a journalist writes about you.
Nice. And so when you talk about the press release thing getting turned into articles, are we saying that on the new on the press release network, they take that press release and then feed it into an article, so they rewrite it, or do they just simply use it as a white label, then just distribute it as an article? How does that work?
So they a bona fide news outlet will never take the press release and copy and paste it and give that out as an article. They will write it and rewrite it.
Right.
And so it'll be an article that is written by them and largely for copyright reasons.
Yeah.
If they just copy and pasted, open source press releases, there wouldn't be anything very of value there. But no, so that's the goal. We call that earned media because
Okay.
you've earned it and the journalist has turned it into something. Some blogs sometimes will copy and paste a press release, but even then, they tend to like write their own analysis and
Mm.
introduce it. Hey, pulled this off the wire today. Thought it'd be interesting. I love how they're trying to spin that this is for the blah blah blah. And so there's usually a little bit of analysis and thought in it. And then they may copy and paste it, but predominantly it's an original article,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
the article like the one I mentioned where we got picked up by the Economist and the Financial Times. Every article was different. The
Hmm.
Washington Post, it was in the business section, and it talked about it from a business standpoint. I think Red Herring talked about it from an entertainment standpoint of this whole world that we don't know about of 1-900 numbers, where there's adult entertainment, there's stuff
Yeah.
for kids. You could call for story, you could be read stories at bedtime for children. Just this whole gamut of offerings, and each one, chose a different focus,
Okay.
and so it is you don't and also you don't control it. I remember once Microsoft talked about how they were trying to make a safer environment, so they were shutting down. I mentioned this before, bulletin boards. They said they were no longer going to support bulletin boards, and a cynical Wall Street Journal reporter said, that's so beautiful for them to say that, but they haven't shut down Skype or anything else that's profitable at the time. He goes, and there's a lot more predators on these places than there is on bulletin boards today. The fact is, they can no longer monetize bulletin boards, and that's the real reason they're shutting it down. So even when you say something in a press release, doesn't mean that the journalist won't dig deeper and
Mm.
try to unpeel what the real story is there. Now that investigative journalism is mostly reserved for the big companies,
Yeah.
and not the type of analysis they do for smaller companies. But it does show that even then you don't control the outcome. You can
Mm.
put it out there one way and it can get perceived another way by the media, especially if they're willing to really consider what it is that you're trying to spin.
So I'd love to know. There's a number of questions I wanted to ask you around that, because as you were talking, I'm thinking, well, people take LinkedIn for example. People write LinkedIn articles all the time. People might have their own PR person within their business that's doing press releases for the company and where they send it to. Um, so what's the like if I'm thinking about the value proposition, because people are listening to this, they'll be in sales and they're thinking, well, what's our value proposition here? You mentioned that when you send a press release out, it goes to all the different outlets and you're affiliated with obviously some big news outlets and so forth. Then they take it. Obviously, there has to be attribution back to you, or how does the credibility then come back to the original source, if you like, that builds market credibility that might lead to conversations and hopefully interest and therefore conversion in the end of the
So,
day.
so the first thing is press releases are greedy. They're always about you. So
Yeah.
you're like, you're not going to have, you know, eReleases announce a press release where I talk favorably about a competitor. They're going to be centric about me and about what I'm doing that's really great and newsworthy and worthy of being appreciated. But more importantly, it's going to be something that a journalist is going to either want to write about or share with their audience. And at the end of the day, that's the metric that you have to measure. Is this going to be important enough that a journalist is going to want to share it with their audience? Is their audience going to either be educated by it or entertained by it, or maybe even both? Is this going to be tantalizing to them?
Mm.
And what you're doing is you're promoting something about you. So there have been very few instances where I have someone talk about a subject where they are the focus of it and they've been stripped out and removed. It's
Right.
rare, but that does happen. Journalists don't generally do that. In the cases that it's happened, it's usually been where the company wasn't mentioned in it, but they included a quote by the company that was in the press release.
Right.
And here's the mistake: it was a weak quote. When it
Right.
goes to the managing editor, he looks at this article and says, scratch that quote. I've never heard of this company, and it's a terrible quote. And then all of a sudden, once you take the quote out that mentioned you, you're no longer even included. And so
Yes.
that's how that happens. But that's rare.
Mm.
I've seen that only 3 times over 20 some years. So it happens very rarely. And journalists don't want to steal your idea of a story and take you out of it. There's nothing in it for them, to not promote you other than
Mm.
you had a weak quote. So I always tell people one of the, greatest things you can do in a press release is have an amazing quote. And what that means is, I'm a wordsmith, so it's going to be my poetic flourish, perhaps. But for the average person, it means active verbs saying something very succinctly. If it's more than a sentence, it better be worth it,
Yeah.
And if it's more than 2 sentences, forget it.
Yeah.
They're not going to be interested. So, say something as strong, as concise as possible with active verbs, and it'll win. Because
Mm.
if they were to paraphrase it, there would be a loss or an ache for what was originally written. And if you condensed it and have active verbs, it's very unlikely that they're going to paraphrase it to something
Mm.
that's not going to be there. Now, if a journalist is looking at 2 stories that aren't very newsworthy, but one has a strong quote, they're going to gravitate to that because they know if they write a good article for both, that quote's going to make that article stand out even more.
Yeah.
And so a great quote can really save you, especially if the newsworthiness is not as strong. Secondly, is the headline, because on the news wires, they're streamed by headlines and the journalist clicks through. Now, they do view them by industry and they do get to customize keywords. So maybe they cover the fashion world, but they don't cover high fashion. So if you
Mhm.
mention a premium brand, they won't see those releases in their feed. They can customize that. So you want to make sure that the headline is relevant to them and you're not writing for the end user. I have people who put puns in their headline, like it's the New York Post, which is known for these clever headlines, but you don't know what the story's about.
Yeah.
Journalist isn't going to say, wow, I'm looking at my industry feed. I don't know how that's relevant to me, but I'm tantalized. I'm going to click through and waste my time reading it. They don't play that game. They
Yeah.
save that for the consumers, because the payoff is it's going to be a well-written article that they've written for the consumers, but don't play that game for journalists. The best headlines are ones that try to say as much as possible in as little space. And again, active verbs, lots of details, make it apparent that this is relevant to your industry. If you're writing something for the telecom industry, it may be appropriate to say, best new voice over IP router for the is prepared to overtake the telecom industry. That's going to just make them feel like, this is very relevant
Yeah.
to me. And you've mentioned some buzzwords like voice over IP and things like that that are relevant to me and what I cover. And so those are the best headlines. And
Mm.
so the quote and the headline are the most important, but other things that really help are images. With us, you get to upload 2 photos. You're given the option to embed them for additional fee, and that's just vanity. You don't need that. If a journalist likes your story and there's photos, the fact that they're embedded makes no difference to them. They're
Yeah.
going to pull them down. Um, if a journalist is considering two stories, but one has photos, they'll use that one because when they post online, they get to put those photos there, and photos are more search engine traffic, more engagement for users, and people like those. And the
Yeah.
best photos today are more candid shots. If you have your product on a messy desk or in the field being used, that works better than like a polished image. Back in the day, they used to put a printer on blue velvet and they'd have spotlights above it, and it would be a professional photographer, the Ansel Adams of dot matrix printers or something taking the picture. You don't need that today. What you take on a regular Android or iPhone is completely sufficient. And so I love the changes that have happened in PR the last 20 some years. I feel like it's become more democratized. So,
Mm.
you don't need a $1,500 photo shoot in order to get images for your press release. You
Yeah.
don't need to even, strictly adhere to AP style, which, used to, if you made one mistake, the PR world said you could be blackballed. Your company, and I always thought that's the craziest thing. And today, if you send a press release up and it's not 100% following the AP style, the newswire doesn't even really care or change it anymore. They're like, it's close enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
used to title case had to be perfect, and now it's like some of the of and with and things like that they cared about with AP style they don't really adhere to anymore. So I think it's great because the idea that one little stupid stylistic mistake should matter, it doesn't. And the
Yeah.
fact is, journalists are just looking for a good story. They're writing it. So if you have the mistake, they're going to fix it in post, when they write this original article. It should be the story that matters. And I think today stories matter more than they ever have.
So is that why a lot of press releases get ignored because the story is not punchy, it doesn't have a good headline. It's just like beige and it's just because there's so much information available in the world today that it's really difficult to stand out. And if you look at like all the influencers that are out there, how many controversial headlines are they trying to create and the competition to make sure, hey, look
Right.
at me, look at me, look at me. It's fascinating, and it must be difficult to I guess differentiate in a sea of, for want of a better term, sameness.
Yeah. So I had mentioned before that press releases are kind of greedy because you're promoting you, but they're also, you have to balance that you are reverse engineering it from the standpoint of what an audience would want. And so you can accomplish both. So I'm trying to promote my product, and that's one of the most common press releases we get is a product or service launch. And it's like,
Hmm.
hey, we have this new product, or we an upgraded service, this next premium level of a software rollout or something like that. And it usually consists of an announcement where here's the product, here's a list of features, and here's the page to learn more about it.
Hmm.
And from your standpoint, everything that needs to be there is there. But from an audience standpoint, why do I care about this product? You haven't made me care about it. And so that's when we have to go back to the press release and add more to it. And, I had mentioned the story arc. There's not a lot of story in a list of features, but one of the things you could do is you could put a use case study there.
Yeah.
This product or service didn't come to market without people trying it. Take one of those favorable outcomes and share that story. And
Mm.
so if you have a logistics software solution and it writes the invoices and it's based on logic rather than just trying to win the sale, and I believe this will cover our costs. You can actually say, hey, in the transportation world, this you take a publicly available data point, 63% of new transportation companies fail in the first 5 years because they don't achieve profitability. Company X is 3 years old. They've never achieved a profit. After using our software for 120 days, they're projected to have a 5% net profit for the first time. Then you have a
Mm.
quote by them. we always thought we just had to win more contracts and that would get us to profitability. And what we found is if we keep winning contracts that we're not profitable with, we'll be out of business with a lot of revenue, but no profit. And so we found that this software was easy to implement and we were able to achieve profitability and know when to stop negotiating with customers because
Mm.
this project wasn't going to work for us. And but again, you got to say that in one or two sentences most.
Yes.
You want it to be succinct to have their quote because that's the key to quotes that they're strong and it's one or two sentences. And there is nothing wrong than taking the actual words that your customer says and repackaging it and putting some active verbs in it and getting it down to one sentence, two at
Yeah.
most, and then sending it back over and say, "Hey, does this sound a little bit better?" And then the customer goes, "I love it." And then we're good. They've signed off on it. And it's not their exact words, but it was the spirit of what they said. But it was sort of packaged for
Yeah.
PR to get out there.
But
And
Mickey,
you
if
would
if if they end up saying it, then it becomes their quote.
correct. And but you can see how that's more of a story arc. The journalist can say, "Hey, here's a new logistics software," and before you get all sleepy, let's point out that 2/3 of people in our industry fail because they're not profitable. And here
Mm.
was a company that was going to be yet another casualty. You know, 2, 3 years, no profit. And now, for the first time, just by implementing this solution, they're on track to achieve profitability. And, how empowering is that? And all of a sudden, the audience of readers are going to be like, oh, you've made this relevant to me.
Yeah.
You've shown us the stakes. You've given us this thing where we're rooting for this company that was about to fail.
Mm.
And that's what it's about. It's just, it basically, what can you do to humanize the story? And in this case, a customer was the easiest way to do that. For other people, it's your launch. What is it about your company, your journey? What was it like? What was the impetus for creating the company or the product or the
Yeah.
solution or something like that? And we all have these stories. I mean, on Shark Tank, which is popular here, Lions Den in the UK, they have these things everywhere. They always start with sharing a background story. I was laid off and I had this hobby with my dad, and he had died a couple of years ago. And I was wondering, could I resurrect this and turn it into an actual product? All of a sudden, we're going, gosh, this
Yeah.
person lost their father, lost their job, and now they're trying to make a go of it. I want them to succeed. That is the most natural thing that we as humans do. We have empathy. We want to care about people. And that is the real value of PR and, communicate that story. Think about what is your why? Why are you in business? What are you
Yeah.
about? Not everybody has this same story, but some of you do. I had one woman said, "Oh, I don't think I have one." And I'm like, "Well, what you've been in business for 26 years. What caused you to go into the HR world as a consultant?" And she goes, "That's my mom." She said, "I don't want you to end up like me where you just stay home and you don't matter." And I was like, "Oh,
Oh
that's
no.
like a gut punch, That's a gut
Yeah,
punch
don't
that your
matter.
mother feels that way, that she doesn't feel valued." And I said, "First thing you got to do is your mom still alive?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "You got to tell her you love her." She goes, "I tell her all the time." You got to tell her that raising you was so important because, to believe that there are women out there who don't realize that, staying home and keeping a home and raising children is not an amazing thing. But there's also this thing about where your mother didn't feel complete because she didn't have a career and
Mm.
she wanted you to own something and to be something, and that you have to work on it to make it your language and your story. But there's something there, I told her, and she agreed, and eventually she did really well with it, and she got it down to like a very small elevator pitch about, I grew up with a mom who always felt she was less than because she didn't matter in the professional world, because to her,
Mm.
my father's world of business was all that mattered. And now she had a daughter and she didn't want her to make the same mistake I did. And I don't feel anything wrong about what my mother did. And I tell her that I love her and she was an amazing mother and I had the best experience. But I also felt empowered that this is something I could do. I could go out
Mm,
there and build my own world and, create my own company. And, that's beautiful stuff and it's there. Like I said, it's not there for everybody, but do that inventory and think about it. Also, as you're doing things, are there stories there? Locally in the Baltimore Sun, we have a couple of companies that get in the media all the time and they don't advertise, but they're available to the
mm,
media. And so when a journalist is looking to plug in a local company on an issue, they'll call and that company drops everything. And they'll, if it's relevant to HR or workplace culture, they bring them in. If it's relevant to the sales team, they bring them in and they get them talking and they give them great quotes. And, and
which is great PR, isn't it?
it is. And, one of the things that they've noticed is that this just happens at least once or twice a year that they get contacted and they get put in there. And it's all about, being, coming up with an amazing quote that, feeds the story that they're looking
Mm,
for.
mm,
And, these are the, workplace culture issues. How do you run a sales team when people don't want to go into the office? How do you maintain workplace culture in those type of environments? And, this is a company that does a hybrid, but one of the things that they do is, they also align themselves with other things that bring them together. They do Habitat for Humanity at least quarterly, where they go out on a weekend and all build something together
yeah.
to help others and things like that. And those are the kinds of stories that play well in newspapers and other places because they're examples of what can be done. And so, is there something like that in your company that you need to put into a story and record it and make it available so that it's there for the media? And you can issue a press release about that and nothing happens, but you put that on your website. That's your recorded history. You have a
Mm,
newsroom, and a journalist who's hunting for a story will go there sometimes 2 or 3 years later and
mm,
still pull that out and make that relevant today. And so that's the great thing about this stuff is it builds on itself. And journalists looking for stories can find stuff. So you can say, that press release didn't do anything, and then it gets resurrected a year or two later. And just make sure you're recording your story, you're sharing it. When you do get media wins, take those and put them in front of your leads because you'll convert higher. Put them in front of your customers. You'll reduce your churn. The people who shop around every couple of years, it'll put them on pause for a little bit because
mm,
they'll feel like we're with the right company because they're
mm.
being recognized as leaders, as experts, as doing something really unique in the industry. Why would we ever, change horses in the middle of the river right now? It seems like they're doing really well.
Absolutely. So is this why a lot of press releases fail because they don't tap into the story, the background, they don't humanize it, and they think, as you alluded to before, when you're setting all those faxes, it's just data, data, data without context.
Right,
So what you're saying is an effective press release, whether it's going nationally or just in your local area, has to have literally the answering the question why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why should anybody listen to us? And it has to be humanized.
right,
So you have people that are putting themselves into a situation where they're either going to be using your product or they're putting themselves into a case study of a person who you've referred to in the story, who they are similar to. They say, oh, well, that person got that benefit, therefore I'm more likely to now investigate this
yeah.
if I've got a challenge in that area. So why do you think then, Mickey, that the vast majority of organizations don't do this?
Because there's also a component in PR where people people put deposits in the PR bank by being a good friend and source of a journalist. And as a PR professional, they then tap them and say, "Look, I've got this client. Is there any way you could do this story?" And it's like, "Ugh, this is not a newsworthy story." And they're like, "I know, but." They're like, well, he did get me an interview with Jeff Bezos six years ago. And so they're like, you know what? I'll do it. And so companies see it work occasionally when chips are called in by PR professionals with journalists. And that is what PR professionals do. They they put deposits in with certain journalists and then they cash in those chips every once in a while. That's why the best PR firm can't work with thousands of people. They
Mm.
literally can't have thousands of clients. They only have so much, uh, deposits at certain banks of journalists. And so they can't call into chips on behalf of tens of thousands of people, usually just dozens of people. And that's why
Mm.
most PR firms are very specialized in particular industries. They'll, make sure that this fashion editor is well taken care of, that when they're visiting, they do, within ethical bounds, they treat them to a free dinner or they network with them. They put them in connection with people that they know that matter. And
Yeah.
and that person, they get nothing out of it then. But then when they're calling and they're like, "Can you help me out here? I've really got this client who's like breathing down my neck. You were really trying to find something," and they'll brainstorm together. And sometimes he'll go, "Maybe we could, maybe we could make this angle work." So now you have the journalist trying to make a story work as well. And so that's generally why. And so if you look at what gets picked up out there, you have the illusion that these things that don't matter can get picked up too. But people cash in a lot of chips for those things that don't matter to get picked up. They're always going to cover the big companies in every industry.
Yeah.
But the small things that don't matter that do get picked up are often because there's a twisting of the arm by a PR person with someone that they know and they sort of have a relationship with, and they're able to sort of cash in some goodwill that they've created with them. But my thing is there are ways to get picked up that are predictable. Like 97% of press releases don't generate earned media. And what I've found is if you look at the 3% that do, there are patterns there. And, the story arc is one of them, does extremely well. Another one is an industry survey. I have
Hmm.
never had anyone I've coached through doing a survey in their industry not get earned media. 100% success rate. And, it's like you want to ask relevant questions that are going on in your industry right now, and maybe things that aren't going on that no one's really detected. I call those blind spots. You
Yeah.
know them because you can't wait to go to a trade show or conference and say, "Hey, have you noticed that it seems like everybody in the industry right now is like slow paying you?" It's like net 30's been like, "Oh, check's been sent. I don't know what's going on. Let me get back to billing." And they're playing this game to slow pay you, or they're trying to turn it into 2 or 3 payments. And they're like, "Yeah." And it's like, that's a sign that capital's drying up, could be across the entire country or globe, or it could just be in your industry.
Mm.
And sometimes it's just your company is in bad shape, but it's good. You want to talk to other colleagues and see, is it just our company or are other people noticing it as well? And
Mm.
often these are things that your trade publications and industry journalists haven't yet reported on. So if you're the one that brings it to the forefront through a survey and said, "Hey, 62% of people in our industry are noticing that people are paying slower. They're not growing their sales anymore. The treading water is the new growth." And those are things that could do really well in a survey. And so you want to ask like anywhere from 12 to 16 really poignant questions. Brainstorm with others. What would you like to know right now? I mean,
Yeah.
are there concerns about AI replacing your job or things like that? Look at the things that are going on in the world around us. The workplace culture, going back to work post pandemic. Are you still struggling with that? And you could ask questions around that. But pick a variety of questions. I usually use like SurveyMonkey, 4 questions per page. So if someone stops during the path, you've still collected page 1 or page 2 or page 3.
Mm.
And the most important questions in the beginning, of course. And you don't need a Rolodex of people to send this to. People get overwhelmed with that. There are trade publications, small and independent ones, that are out there in every industry. In the PR industry, everybody's told me, well, Mickey, ours is the exception. There's only Public Relations Society of America in North America and the US. And I'm like, there's over 700 small and independent PR trade associations in the US. You just have to do a Google search. They're out there. And so pick one. I like at least 500 to 1,000 members. Some are going to be too small, like Florida PR firms, or
Yeah.
but like one was PR firms of 50 employees or less, which is like I got to say probably 80% of the PR market. And that one was like several thousand members. When you reach out to that trade association and say, "Hey, I have this survey. Could you send this link to your members? In exchange, I'll mention your organization, in a press release I'll be issuing over PR Newswire nationally in the coming weeks." Two-thirds of them will say yes right out of the
Mm.
bat. We'll do this because now this is an opportunity for them to get media attention.
Yeah.
And we've already said nobody knows these people exist because people only know the big guys out there.
Oh,
So it's a win-win.
and when you compare that to putting ads on mainstream media, even doing Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads, there's no guarantee you're going to get the penetration or the coverage versus through a reputable publication, you're more likely to get targeted a targeted audience that at least might be in the realm to buy, or at least be interested in what you've got to say. So it's more relevant.
Yeah. And everybody that takes the survey, you control the outcome link on
Yeah.
SurveyMonkey. Send them
Mm.
to a page of the website, introduce yourself, and say, hey, put your email here, and I'll send you the results of the survey when it's done, and you can follow up with them. And so many people believe, oh, these are my competitors. No, these are people that you just introduced yourself, and what you did was you gave an elevator pitch of who your ideal customer is.
Mm.
So if their ideal customer is in the academic world, and you just mentioned that your ideal customer is a small company of 5 employees or less, when they get that customer, they'll immediately have someone to send it to
Yeah.
that when they can't supply. Your best partners are often people that you initially assume are your competitors.
Mm.
And what you realize is a lot of them are looking for people to refer to when you're not their perfect
Mm.
client. And it's a great way to introduce yourself and then put them on the newsletter list and continue to tell them who it is you serve, celebrate your wins, and share the results of the survey and stuff like that. It works really well. When people do this, they generally get anywhere from 6 to 14 articles.
Mm.
And the least I've ever had of someone I've coached through this is 4 articles.
Okay.
And they were in biometrics, and they were just like, I didn't even know if 4 people wrote about biometrics industry. So they were thrilled. But it elevates you as a thought leader when you are the author of a survey.
Well,
And
and
you've
that
aligned
equals
yourself with a trade association as
yeah,
well, makes you even look more important.
and that equals trust. So if there's trust and it's not believe what I'm saying, it's others are sort of saying this as well. So it increases your, as you say, your credibility. A couple of things I wanted to ask you in relation to press releases. You've mentioned a couple of times the story arc. And if I look at sales leaders and organizations that are trying to pitch to an organization, a potential customer, we often talk about the power of the story and placing the customer in that story. From a story arc perspective, is there like not so much a magic formula, but is there a formula that you use in press releases that follows like a sequence, or there are three key chunks? Is it past, present, future? What's I guess the formula for a story arc that works best?
So for me, it's just trying to get all the elements of a story that's compelling, and I generally let it be natural. So
Hmm.
if I'm talking to someone and I'm like, "Okay, has someone used this?" and they're like, "Yeah," and it's like, "Well, do you know some of their?" Most of the time, I say, "Do you know any of these favorable outcomes?" Most of them don't. Most of
Yeah.
them are very bad about following up. So a lot of times, it's us picking up the phone and calling some of these people who beta tested it and just say, hey, I know that you gave a thumbs up to the product, but we'd love to know a little bit more details about your experience. Is there any concrete numbers or data points or anything that you can point us to that this the use of this did? And surprisingly, we get some results. It's like probably 15% of them will come back with something very favorable, and then we can work with that. And then I often like to do an interview with them afterwards and just sort of get some of their thoughts. And that's where I take what they literally said and I smush it down to a sentence or two that's beautiful and very, active verbs. I don't say this is my words. I go back and say, hey, based on what we were talking about, I think this is what you were saying. And they go, oh yeah, that's exactly what I said. And they, they're fine with it. Now we got our quote, and then we build that out. I just try to make it as genuine as possible. I'm not really looking for a formula. I'm looking for authenticity
Yeah,
and something that will feel real to an audience person who's, looking for, an experience.
yeah,
And
no,
a real human experience that seems authentic is going to be well received, regardless of sort of a pattern or anything like that.
yeah, I like it, like it. Um, and the last question I wanted to ask you was AI is huge, and AI is only going to continue to get more and more huge. From a PR perspective, how do you see AI playing out? Is it something that is a threat to PR? Is it something that's going to augment what you're doing? Do you see it as a good thing that's going to help more people get more authentically good quality PR information out there, or do you see something else?
So I don't necessarily see PR replace PR. I don't see AI replacing uh like PR Newswire. PR Newswire is expensive. I wish something could, but I kind of feel like journalists like fishing in two ponds in the US, PR Newswire and Business Wire, and the fact that it's so pure and the antithesis of their email inbox makes it so attractive.
Yeah.
So I don't see that going away currently. But what I do see is AI being used in the creation of press releases.
Hmm.
And I think that AI works really well, but you kind of have to make it do your bidding. Never ask AI to write a press release about your company because it's been trained on all the press releases out there, including
Yeah.
the 97% that don't get
Don't
earned
work.
media. So you have to come to it with the 3%. You have to say, I need you to write a press release on this specific topic.
Yeah.
And here's some information about the company. And this is where I get the best results.
Yeah.
Give me a structure, an outline of what this press release would look like. And then it goes bloop, and then say, okay, element by element. Give me 10 versions of the headline.
Yeah.
And then I look through, and I'm also going who, what, when, where, how, and why, all the tenets of journalism. Does which headline works really well and addresses most of the who, what, when, where,
Hmm.
how, and why? Because again, we want to make sure a busy journalist sees that headline and says, this answers all my questions. I want to click through and dig in
Yeah.
and find out more. And so it might be one of the headlines stands out. It might be, hey, could you rewrite this version of the headline, but also incorporate the why or the how of this, which is, and you may have to tell it what the how or why is. And then I go, okay, now give me one open, no, give me three versions of an opening paragraph for this press release. And
Hmm.
then I look at it again and say, are all my who, what, when, where, how, and whys addressed that need to be addressed in that opening paragraph? And which paragraph does it best? And
Yeah.
sometimes you may have to have it rewrite a paragraph, say, this one comes closest, but something's missing. Could you write this and incorporate this?
Yeah.
And then, okay, now write the next paragraph. And
Yeah.
then usually by the second or third paragraph, I go, let's now write a quote that's going to go back into the second or third paragraph and give me 10 sentences that are very succinct and describe this element very well. And I'm speaking from someone with authority and lots of active verbs. Sometimes it gets good, but sometimes you might have to go in there and make it a little bit better. The
Mm.
quote is the one place that I feel you really have to dig in and make sure it's a strong, strong sentence, and ideally one sentence. And then I just take it to the remaining paragraphs, and then we end up with a finished product. Now, it is true that you can say, write a 700 word press release on this topic about this company, and it'll
Yeah.
do it. But I feel like the way I did it, you're going to end up with probably a press release that's got a 2 to 3 times more likelihood of getting picked up. And that's huge. So
Yeah.
spend the extra 10 minutes because that's all we're talking about here. What I described, I've done it. I've
Yeah.
done like dozens of these for my staff and shared with them. The
Yeah.
longest I've ever taken is 17 minutes, and that one was a different because it had three crazy founders, and I wanted to make sure I had a paragraph dedicated to each of them because it was so crazy. It was a doctor, it was a comedian, and this other guy that came and founded this random company, and it was so interesting that I they needed to each have their own section, and that
Yes.
took a little bit longer. But most of these took 10 minutes
Yeah.
of me coaching it back and forth, and we
Yeah.
ended up with a great press release. And don't just let it come up with something simply because it looks like a good press release, but you can get a great press release if you just spend a little more time and have the AI slow down and
Yeah.
focus on each element because AI wants to go fast,
It
so
does.
fast that it does a good job. You could
Yeah.
get a great job out of it if you get it to slow down and give you options.
So you want to be that. You want to be in that 3%. So it pays dividends to spend that 10 minutes or 17 minutes to do that and train it, right?
Right,
And if it doesn't hit that why, what, when, how, etc., then go back and re-ask the question. And the same thing goes for when you're doing pitches, when you're doing emails to clients. I think AI is going to be phenomenal if we use it correctly, but don't give in to AI and think, well, the AI is the source of all truth. We are the
right,
source of truth, and we have to train it to
sure,
be a representation of us, because ultimately people are wanting to do business with those who they know, like, and trust.
right.
So, Mickey, as we wrap up, where's if people want to know more about you and certainly the concept of e-releases and what you're doing, where's the best place for them to connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Okay, so the website is eReleases.com. All of our social media is on the lower right, including LinkedIn, my personal LinkedIn there. Um, and feel free to chat or email or call the office during business hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And we only have editors, no salespeople, no commissions. We're all in for helping people. We recognize that we help a lot of people with their first real press release and getting that out to the media. And I have a free masterclass that's less than an hour long that goes through the 3% of press releases you should be doing.
Okay.
And I guarantee anybody that walks through that in less than an hour will have probably 6 to 10 ideas that are newsworthy that even the most non-newsworthy companies can implement to get PR. And that's completely free at ereleases.com/plan. And that's PLAN. And again, it's completely free and it's less than an hour long. It used to be 7 hours, and I realized this is the TikTok and Instagram Reels generation. I got to condense this down to less
Down
than
to
an
an hour.
hour.
Down to an hour.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome, mate. So I'll put those on the show notes, and yeah, I certainly encourage people to check you out and certainly do the masterclass, because when you think about it, in a market that is in many countries saturated with information, um, it's really important to try and differentiate ourselves, and we've got to differentiate ourselves with ethics, with integrity, but also being of service that really says to the customers, hey, we've got something that might be able to solve that problem if there's a problem that you need to solve.
Right. And
So
the one thing I tell people is a press release is not a magic bullet. Commit to a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases. You don't have to do them all at once. You can spread them out, quarterly,
yeah.
4 times a year. So a year and a half to do 6 releases. Some of them are not going to work, but if you follow the strategic releases, 2 or 3 of them will matter, and they'll matter in a way you'll be shocked that you haven't considered PR before. And you could do all this 6 to 8 releases for under $3,000 with e-releases. And so,
Mm.
there's a new customer special in the footer of the website, and you can click on that and lock in a really good deal. And it's something that everybody should consider. But unfortunately, we see most people when there's recessions. We usually grow double digits during recessions, we grow 10 to 30%. And it's often because people have to pause their ad spend. And
Yeah.
now they're like, what can we do creatively with not much money? And they turned to PR and said, I've always thought about it, but I've never sat down and put the effort and time into it. And I'm just like, if you do, just do it quarterly. And after a year or two, you'll realize what a game changer that was. Just nurturing and feeding that quarterly, you'll start to have 2 or 3 wins a year,
Mm.
and it will make a meaningful difference to your business.
And significantly save you money that you don't have to spend on an ad campaign that, from all intents and purposes, feeds the big metas of the world, but doesn't necessarily generate a lot of revenue for
It'll
you.
help your ad campaigns by increasing your conversion rate.
Yeah,
We work with a
100%.
lot of people that appear on Shark Tank and like Squatty Potty and Manscaped, and they did over 20 releases each and got a lot of PR because they then knew once we cut on ad spending now, we just reduced our ad budget by 30 to 50% because of all the PR we've gotten, all of the credibility that we have linking
Mm,
to us that we don't have we are going to convert much higher as a result now.
mm. Nice. Awesome. Hey, Mickey, greatly appreciate you jumping on. I know it's quite late in the evening in Maryland, so thank you so much for sharing on the podcast. And I hope in the positive psychology, as positive cycles of the economy, you actually do double and triple digit growth, not just waiting for the next recession.
Yeah, same here.
Thanks, Mickey.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.